Hello everyone. Today I'll be following up with the old school ships in featuring the Izumo, the tier 9 IGN battleship that I probably haven't featured in 2 years or so. Before I start though, let me just start by giving you guys a big fat thank you. I noticed that a bunch of you had started actually taking some time out of your day to drop a follow on my Twitch channel, and I just want to say I really appreciate it, and hopefully come Christmas I'll be able to thank you guys proper. For now though, I am committing to making a lot of vids and just being really active on YouTube as a way of thanking you guys for showing the support on the Twitch channel as well. I really do appreciate you guys dropping that follow. It's very nice of you all. Moving on, the Izumo, the tier 9 IGN battleship. The ship has gone through a lot of changes over the days, or the years, sorry, not days. It used to be both ugly and terrible. You can probably still call it ugly, but calling the Izumo terrible these days, well, that's starting to stretch it a bit. Even with all the power creep that, honestly, even a blind man can see is happening in World of Warships. The first and most obvious change was of course the survivability buff. The Izumo never really had too much health. It's got about the same health as what you would expect on Aiva, Missouri. They got 78, 79. You're sitting at 78, 79. You're healthier than the Lion, but of course you're squishier than the monster Musashi, which is of course in a tier of its own. It's pretty much tier 9.5, almost tier 10. So it never really had too much health, but it also suffered from having extremely thin plating. It used to have 32mm deck armor. Basically that entire center part around the superstructure used to be 32. About in the start of 2018, or I think it was about the summer 2018, they finally decided to address this, and they buffed this plating from 32 to 57. At the same time, they also greatly buffed the concealment, which used to be absolutely dreadful. The base concealment without any build or anything was 19.3, and they buffed it to 17.2. So they basically buffed concealment by 2 kilometers. It used to be completely dreadful. So it used to be, the survivability of the ship used to be terrible. Now it's pretty okay. The 57mm armor helps you a fair bit, because it's such a high value that not only does it shatter all IFHE spam, but it also helps you against most of the 50mm pens like Hindenburgs and so forth, and the super cruisers that have been added to the game. So it's actually fairly durable. It does have some issues with giving too much broadside, because when you want to use the third turret and having a really big flat broadside to shoot at, but in general the nose and survivability of the Izumo is pretty sturdy. The other change came at the end of 2018, when they decided that this AP shell 410 APC, was it type 91? I think it was type 91. They buffed the penetration on it. They actually buffed the penetration on it so much that it became decent. I know, it sounds shocking, but at 15 kilometers the Izumo now has a pen of 427mm, which puts it about almost 60mm above the Alsace and the Jean Bart, and a good 15mm almost above, no, 10mm above the Aiva and Missouri. It still loses out to the likes of Lion, Musashi, Georgia, of course, and Sovietsky Soyuz, who has magical guns, but in general the penetration is pretty good on the ship. The big issue is, of course, still dispersion. Well, the end of 2018, Wargaming decided to address that as well, and they buffed the Sigma from 1.8 to 2.0. So this ship has gotten armor buffs, concealment buffs, penetration buffs, and finally accuracy buffs. In its current state now, the Izumo is actually a pretty strong ship. It requires some getting used to. The weird turret setup makes it play a bit differently. You kind of weave in and out a bit with the ship, but the penetration capacity is obviously there, as you can see, punishing this other Izumo with some citadels. It does have issues though. It's huge. The ship is absolutely gigantic, and it feels gigantic as well. That's something to keep in mind, and that probably has to do with its handling. it's a clumsy beast. 890-meter turning circle is pretty bad, but what's actually significantly worse about it is that the turning circle is terrible at 19.7. I think it's actually the worst across the board of all tier 9 BBs. Also, of course, the speed is 28 knots. The Musashi has 27 knots. That's the only battleship that's slower. Everyone else is either the same speed or significantly faster, like Iowa 33, Alsace 32, even Sean Bart is 30. So, and of course, when you had a speed flight gone, it's a percentage buff, so they actually gain more of an advantage than you do. The guns, though, are good. 410 millimeters, as I mentioned. The AP Alpha isn't maybe that special at 12.9, but you got 3 guns, and as I mentioned, 2.0 Sigma, good penetration, and decent fuse arming threshold, decent penetration, so you can punish a lot of ships. There's still, of course, the classic trolley dispersion at times, but then when the dispersion favors you, as you saw happen to that poor Sinop, you can pull some really devastating volleys in this thing. The Izumo does have the firepower to punch with the tier 10s these days. It used to be a meme, it used to be a joke. These days, I would say it's significantly better than the Aiva. I would personally rate it above the Aiva in terms of performance. The Aiva is vulnerable to all sorts of different spam. Another issue that people don't often mention, or another advantage that the Izumo has, is if you look at its superstructure, it actually has very little superstructure. This is something that you also see on, for example, the Fuso. And that is, it's a pretty much flat deck with a couple of things sticking out. That's the end of the superstructure. It doesn't have that large, bulky American superstructure like the Iowa has that is easy to farm and easy to spam. The Izumo has very little targetable area on top of it. And this is a significant advantage. Now, of course, this advantage comes at the cost of basically there not being any AA mounts on top of it. So carriers will love, well, they do love targeting the Izumo. I think it's got something like less than half of Iowa's AA. I think it might even be a quarter or a third of Iowa's AA. Regardless, don't expect to shoot down any planes in this thing. The AA is a complete joke in the Izumo. That's of course why you always want to move around with your team. In general, most AA is kind of a joke these days in the game anyway, so hug the ships that can provide you with AA power, because, well, you will need it. If you sail around alone, well, you're going to become a very juicy target for multiple things that like hunting battleships. DDs love torpedoing you, big turning circle, slow speed, terrible rudder shift. Yes, please, I'd like to torpedo that thing. Carriers, of course, love targeting you for the same reason, and on top of having terrible AA. So the things that battleships are weak to, Izumo is especially weak to. So keep this in mind. Still though, this game, I've kind of pushed up this flank. We've gotten a significant advantage. You note I'm playing fairly aggressive here. I know there's a DD here, but I also think he's kind of stuck. So I want to make use of this ability to eliminate him. So I'm playing very aggressively because I have the health to spare. And when you have the health to spare in a late game situation like this, you kind of want to be as useful as possible. A bit worrying though is that my teammates did die pretty quick, and we're actually only in a 4 versus 5 or 5 versus 4. I'm about to give us another advantage though, picking up my 4th kill of this game and making it a 5 versus 3. Now we got a significant advantage here. We don't really need to do much right now. We got 2 DDs against none. All team really needs to do is kind of play safe and hold their positions. But have you ever seen your teammates win and not try to win harder? Trust me, it never happens. Whenever your teammates are winning, they feel the need to win even harder. So, of course, my team will be doing some silliness, and I'm looking behind me worried, because I'm worried perhaps will the Shanbart push up, but even more worried is my team going to rush in there. It's not a bad move if they rush in and perhaps ram. Trade 1 for 1. Trading 1 for 1 isn't that bad when you're ahead. When you're ahead in ships, if you trade 1 for 1, well, obviously the enemy will run out of ships earlier. The problem is if they run in there and they don't pull off the trade, well, then we're gonna be in a pretty bad situation. I'm up against the Lion here. He shot a bit of AP, but he's actually starting to reverse, which is kind of smart. The Izumo does have a turtleback, and it can be fairly trolly against the opponent. It can save you in some situations, because if you don't aim perfectly on the right spot, you they tend to mostly get pens and not citadels. But honestly, your citadel is so large that if you do go in a full broadside brawl, they can absolutely citadel you. This Lion, however, is not willing to take the risk, and he chooses to start reversing away. Obviously, if it becomes an HE spam contest nose to nose, he will have the advantage. I'm hesitant to push in because I'm worried if I push in like this, there's going to be a Bismarck and a Jean Bart that's going to farm my broadside, which means easy citadels for them. But my cruiser actually died, and now I see my Missouri is committing to this push. If my Missouri is committing to this push, then I have to commit as well. That's really how it goes. If your team goes in, even if it's a bad call, you kind of have to go in as well, because otherwise you're kind of abandoning them to their suicide run. So I see he's going in, I'm going to have to go in as well. Now, ideally, this would be a very much dead Jean Bart, but sometimes Battleship Dispersion really loves trolling you. And that was one of those situations. 2 overpens and a pen out of 9 shells. And my Missouri that I hoped would go for the run, or go for the ram, appears to actually be missing the Jean Bart. And this is very much not good, because now he's stuck between both of them, crossfired, and we can already see what's happening. He is being pummeled, his health is losing. My Benson appeared to try to YOLO the Lion, but now he's panicking, smoking, running out of his smoke, running away, missing most of his torpedoes. So, and he's got no health left either. So the Benson dies to the Lion guns, and my Missouri gets himself killed as well. So this is quickly turning into a massive throw for my team. I basically blinked and you missed it, and suddenly my team had managed to suicide. That's usually how the games tend to go. That's why I say never underestimate your own team's ability to lose matches. Still though, at this point I'm committed hard. I can't remain in the crossfire from the enemy team, so I'm just going to push fast until I can get these front guns on the broadside. Note that the Izumo is actually really good in these situations, because it can get all 9 guns on the broadside of the enemy faster than the enemy can get all their guns. They can get the front turrets first because of how far in the front the guns are placed, but they can't get the back turret in. Shockingly, my Kagero, I think, attempted the gunboat or something in the open. I'm not sure what happened, but my Kagero also got himself killed. Yes, suddenly what looked like a very easy win, thanks to my team, decided to commit into some very questionable pushes on all sides of the map, has left me with 5 kills, but still being down points and being 1 versus 2. Luckily, I know that Jean Bart is low, and he's, of the two, I would say he is the bigger threat, so we're gonna try to get rid of him as soon as possible. So I'm contesting the cap. Mostly I want to bait them towards me. I want them to know exactly where I am, what I'm doing. Mostly when they see someone very close by in a cap, people tend to chase. There's a lot of tunnel vision in World of Warships. People love chasing the easy target. Also, if they try to sail past here, well, then I can punish their broadsides. So I really like this current position I am in. I'm multiple threats, also cutting off their line. The Benson smoke is kind of sabotaging me a bit, but I'm hoping I'll be able to spot him anyway. And the smoke actually starts fading enough so that I do get vision. Sadly, Jean Bart was angled enough. I got 4 pens, but they kind of disappeared into the torpedo belt or modules or whatever. In return, so I only hit him for 4k. He shoots that flat, huge Izumo broadside I spoke about. He shoots me for 17k. So he's dedicated to angling in, as Jean Barts often do. So we're gonna switch to HE, and we need to start burning some battleships. Bismarck chimes in as well, and well, we're in full retreat at this point. But Izumo HE is not really that bad. IGN HE in general isn't really bad value. I mean, most of the guns are. You got 6.5k alpha on these guns. The only thing that really outmatches that is Musashi, the bigger caliber IGN HE, and the Lion. That's other than that, you got the hardest hitting HE out there. The fire chance is honestly pretty sad. I think it's 30%, but when you're landing several shells of this high caliber HE, your starting fires are guaranteed, and you're hitting very hard. The pen is of course also 68mm, so neither the Jean Bart nor the Bismarck's upper deck or armor will be able to mitigate it. So HE is a very solid choice. He surprisingly survives. If you're wondering why can we see him even though he's behind the island, that's because the ship is so high. A DD in that position could probably have gone undetected behind the island, but the Jean Bart is such a high ship that we can see him sticking out from behind the island. Now we're 1v1 against the Bismarck, but I'm already kiting away. And the most important thing, in getting that kill, I now no longer need to contest the cap. I already have a points lead. He's now forced to chase me. So we're gonna keep kiting away, maintaining as steep angling as we can, and now we're gonna start burning. RNG decides, of course, to troll me. I only get 4 hits. All 4 hits, I think, hit the upper belt and the shatter, and none of them started fire either. Sometimes, as I said, Izumo in the end, even with 2.0 Sigma, even with all these buffs, Izumo is still a battleship, and you get these troll volleys. The next volley is better. We make sure we aim a bit higher, and we start a fire, and we do some damage, and the Bismarck commits the battleship cardinal sin. He damage cons the first fire. As soon as I see that, I realize I have a very good chance of winning this, because he just made a huge mistake. He's also only trying to use his front guns, because he's trying to chase me, and that's also a mistake. He should be using all of his guns. So he's misplaying actively now, and obviously we're gonna take advantage of this. We set a fire on what looks like a superstructure, and my secondary set another fire on it as well. So now I know I got 2 burning fires on superstructure, so obviously we're gonna target his nose next. Not just because we can start pin the nose, but also because we want to start a fire on the nose as well. And exactly what we wanted happens, we get a 3rd fire burning on him. So the Bismarck is currently suffering from a triple fire, no way of damage conning it, and I'm happily kiting away. Note that I have intentionally not used my last heal at this point, because I know he can't devastate me, and AR, Adrenaline Rush, scales based on your current health. So the lower health you are, without using the heal, the faster your reload. As soon as I heal up the health, I lose that AR bonus. So this was basically just complete min-maxing as much DPM as possible, thanks to the Adrenaline Rush perk and the way it interacts with my max health. Once again, this angle on the Izumo, just so very powerful for kiting away. If they aim for the upper belt superstructure, they can get pens, but in general, you are a very sturdy beast when you're angling away like this. And we manage to burn down the Bismarck, and even though my team really tried their best to lose this match, we do manage to secure the win. Confederate, Dreadnought, Kraken, Arsonist, High Caliber. Not exactly the usual Izumo rewards, but you know what? I will take it. This wasn't really the usual game either. 7 kills, 9 fires, 6 citadels, and a shared capture. Okay, you know what? I'll take it. 260k damage in the Izumo isn't bad either, but as I said, I don't think the Izumo is a bad ship anymore. Ugly as sin? Absolutely. Bad? No, I wouldn't really say so. Detailed report, team score-wise, 2.6k base. Not that special. I mean, we were top tier, so obviously we were expected to carry. I'm looking at you, Mr. Alsace. We were expected to carry, so we should score highly. But of course, you got to remember, when you're shooting same or lower tier ships, you don't get that bonus XP. Whereas if you shoot higher tier ships, you get bonus XP. That's why, for example, games where you're tier 8 DD and you kill enemy tier 10 DDs, you tend to rack in a ton of XP because you're getting that bonus of fighting a higher tier ship. Detail report wise, HE 37k, a lot of AP 168, and then of course some fires 43,000 and a bit of secondary 11k. Ultimately though, this game showed there's still a lot of trolliness to the guns of the Izumo. In situations where you don't expect it, the guns can troll, but that 2.0 Sigma also shown, because well, how often do you see 3 shells land on a Sinop and a triple Citadel as well? So there is a lot of power in the ship, it's just hidden behind a pretty ugly exterior. Let me show you guys my recommended build for this ship. Right, as usual, I will start with the modules. On the Izumo, honestly, you should work towards the hull as soon as possible. The default range, which is 19.7, is pretty okay, but the default hull is kind of a nightmare, mostly because it leaves you with a 26-second rudder shift, which is honestly just, it's a terrible joke at that point. The B hull alleviates some of the issues, but ultimately you need to reach that C hull as soon as possible to get rid of that horrendous rudder shift. So the first order of upgrades should absolutely be the hull. The default speed of 28.5 isn't really that bad. The difference in engines is not that significant. So go for hull, range, and finally engine upgrade. Consumable wise, you should absolutely have premium damage control. If you're gonna run one premium thing, then it should be damage control, absolutely. And followed it up with repair party and once again spotter plane if you can afford it. And the reason I don't use fighter plane is because I don't rate it. I think it's trash, whereas spotter plane can be extremely useful for smoke firing, which is what battleships are so very good at. Finally, turret survival. This middle turret does like to blow up, mostly because of the incredibly vulnerable barbette here. Additional tankiness, better dispersion, you want it. More survivability, even though you have this dick armor, there's still a lot of HE spammers and they sure love shooting the Izumo. And mostly because the turret setup is what it is, you kinda end up sitting nose in a lot. And because you end up sitting stationary nose in a fair bit, I don't think the rudder shift is that important. You can switch this for rudder shift, that's a viable option. I just prefer the additional tankiness because I think it fits the Izumo's playstyle. Concealment, because well, your concealment, as I mentioned, it's not that bad anymore. With the full build you can reach 13.5, which for a battleship is quite respectable. And finally, improved reload. It does come at the cost of worse turret traverse, but Izumo's turret traverse is pretty good, and when you spec expert marksman you alleviate these issues further. Build wise, you start priority target, AR, you don't need to start expert marksman because it's so good. Follow it up with superintendent, fire prevention, concealment expert, expert marksman, expert loader. You need to be able to switch to HE for DDs or just nose in battleships. Once again, you saw how much HE I used in that last battle. Don't underestimate the power of shooting HE when there is a need for it, when the situation calls for it. And finally, jack of all trades for faster consumable usage. Flag wise, it's very straightforward. Healing, reduced fires, reduced flooding. Followed up with speed, consumables. You can run the AA flag, probably should run the AA flag, I recommend it, but I mean, your AA, as I mentioned, the long range flag doesn't do much, the short range 306. You're not going to be doing a whole lot of damage here. To put it in perspective, if you're wondering, are these values good? Let's put, we do have the sea hull on the Iowa. So what did we have on the Izumo? We had what, 308 short range? And 159 continuous long range. The Iowa in comparison has 375 short range, 483 mid range, and finally it's 175 long range. But of course this mid range, that entire aura is basically missing on the Izumo, which kind of puts it into perspective just how trash the AA is. So as I mentioned, the lack of superstructure does not come without a cost. Anyway, thank you guys for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed this commentary. If you feel like dropping a follow to some of my social media stuff below in the comment, much appreciated. If not, that's fine. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I will talk to you guys later.